Today's guest is Dr. Claudia Simone Dorchain, philosopher with a background in understanding mass manipulation, propaganda, mysticism, and much, much more. Not only do we get into how important this is to understand as a society, but what this means for you specifically in your life and understanding persuasion, how to use it, and how to defend against it. We get into why using your intuition and logic to make better decisions is so important, as well as your personal power. How gaining mastery of skills across your life can make you a better seducer, better person, and all around better and more confident human being. We discuss some of the craziness around woke and cancel culture and how some social movements are being weaponized against us. And we even get a breakdown of what the hell is going on with this new UFO barrage of information that's blasted at us every day. And no discussion with the philosopher would be complete without a masterclass on Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle.
We've been manipulated since at least 2,400 years, and to wake up and recognize this fact is the first step. Yeah? The second step is to understand the techniques of manipulation. So we will more acutely tune into situations, moments when we are just being manipulated, and we understand these strategies used upon us, and we can call out those who try to fool us. A person with a certain historical knowledge, which you should have and which you should accumulate during your lifetime, because historical knowledge is extremely valuable. It gives you potential for criticizing. If you just know the current situation, you cannot criticize anything, and that's why those in power oftentimes try to abolish history altogether.
Leave us a like on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, check out our Rumble, and enjoy the podcast. We, my friends, will see you later. Welcome back to the channel, my friends. We have with us today Dr. Claudia Simone Dorchain, and we are going to discuss a whole lot of things, propaganda being a central tenet of those. So, Claudia, thanks for being here. How's it going?
I'm fine, thanks. It's an honor to be with you.
Appreciate it. I appreciate it. I really appreciate you being here, too. This is an interesting subject. Obviously, one for the rest of the world, I think, especially considering we have the U.S. elections coming up this year, and just getting a general understanding of everything. Why don't we start with your intro? Just give us a little bit of idea of who you are and how you're so well-versed in this subject.
Well, I'm a philosopher, and I've spent the last 20 years researching. What does one do but by researching philosophy? Well, my fields of research have been mysticism. That means mysticism, the center of the soul, basically in the Western and the Eastern tradition. Means in European mysticism and in the Vedic and Brahmanic teachings. But from philosophy, there is only a short step to anthropology. And so my next field of research has been human sacrifice and the maintenance of power structures, and how to establish and maintain, and it is how to establish and maintain power structures in ancient times and in our contemporary times. And from that, media, aesthetics, and symbology was also a field of research. And this is very this has many fields for application, because we are a culture of media, and we need to know the symbols which are used. And symbol literacy and pattern recognition actually is vital for us also as citizens and a visual culture, in order to understand how much we are manipulated and how much our consent to a certain opinion is manufactured. So you come from mysticism as something which can be seen as very aesthetic to something very political, very far, and very fast. Yeah? And so everything just mixed. You, as a philosopher, you do always find new fields of study. And this keeps it exciting.
Absolutely. I mean, you've touched on some things that I think are very, very important as well. I think we live in a time now, the current zeitgeist being very little trust in what the mainstream media has or says just on a common basis. An awakening to, I think, people understanding that they are being manipulated, or they can be manipulated through the media and different techniques. So could we start with ancient times as well, just to give us an idea of how this propaganda was used in the past? Clearly, the technology to do it on such a massive scale wasn't there, but how did it start? What was the game plan like back then?
Well, mass manipulation and mass psychology has been well researched since Plato's time. That means 2,400 years ago. Plato and Socrates have been around the 4th century before Christ. And Plato actually came from an aristocratic family. If you know how the political system in this very early democracy of Athens has been set up, the aristocratic families have been the most influential politicians, and they knew everything about the power structures, how to establish them and how to maintain them. Plato's uncle actually was Solon, politician. Maybe you have heard in school about the Solonic laws. And of course, he taught his nephew everything he knew about how to manipulate people, basically. And Plato's dialogues have always a slightly political undertone. Many people don't know this. Yeah, they think, it's all about Socrates, giving his teachings to his students, and it is in a way, but not all. All Platonic dialogues, especially dialogues such as the Republic or Protagoras, and the idea of virtue, they all deal with politics. Yeah, the idea was, as already propagated by Uncle Solon, that there is a spider web, and it's always in place. And this spider web is so intense and so tightly weak that the common population cannot escape it. So there was also already the idea of politicians as puppets and of their handlers as puppeteers. This idea actually has been around since the time of Plato and Socrates and later Aristotle, because, of course, this early democracy already followed the rules we, in our day and age, under a different angle, but the very strategic means how to manipulate have always been the same. Therefore, it's no surprise, or it does not come as a surprise when we hear people from ancient Greece already talking about the puppeteers of power and the puppets and the politicians just trying to manufacture consent, just as Edward 𝗪𝗏, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, told us in 1928 in his book called Propaganda. So you see, it spans over 2,000 years. It's always the same structure and really similar notions, similar terminology. This all did not originate today. Aristotle went further, as Plato did. Plato just showed in a general outlook the structures of power and how there is one law for the rich and one law for the poor. And Aristotle went further. He wrote his famous book, Rhetoric, as a tool of powerful communication for politicians. Not for politicians only, also for attorneys, for lobbyists, for everybody. He uses communication on a daily basis in order to persuade. And rhetoric, in the Greek original meaning, means the art of persuasion. And so Aristotle already established the rule: every successful communication, manipulative communication, needs to contain three components: logos, ethos, and pathos. Logos, reason. Ethos means ethic, value, and pathos means emotion. So this was the game plan back then already. So every successful persuasive communication by lawyer, by politician, by already then the puppets of power needs to contain some logical components, of course, also some emotional components, and some values. But these are arbitrary, because you do not need to incorporate the values. You just need to claim that you're an honorable person, and you just need to be a good actor. Basically.
One of the most important things that I have learned interviewing all of these high performance leaders is that clarity of mind is crucial to your success. And what good is clarity of mind without clarity of sound? Which is why today's podcast is sponsored by Rode. We across 𝗪𝗟𝗻𝗂𝗋 use exclusively Rode audio equipment in order to do all of our stuff. If you are an influencer, if you're just a person out there trying to make some good content for your stuff at home, wherever it is, Rode is by far the best audio partner we have ever had. We have been using their stuff for almost 5 years now. Has never let us down. Truly incredible company, especially with all of the other affordable things that you guys can get from them. Check out the link right down below and enjoy the rest of this podcast. So we live in this world where we have people who understand these, let's call them rules to a certain degree, on how to manipulate the power structure, or how to manipulate the common masses, or just in an everyday setting. It makes me also wonder, though. I mean, clearly the structure and things have been around, but I'm curious for people who are listening now and getting ready to gear up and try to make decisions in the US on what's real and what's fake, because that's a massive issue we have now, continuing with AI and whatever we're going to be seeing. We can't trust what we see on TV or on computer. And how have things changed? What do you see now when you look out into the world now, knowing what you know and studying what you've studied? If you could help someone to make better decisions, or to understand where and when they're being manipulated, and how to garner and, find truth. I just got done reading a book on the Socratic method, and it was fascinating to see their use of this method as a tool within their head for reason and to calm the mind, and how that was central to this. And it's absolutely fascinating. But maybe you could just, expand on what the common man now could do in this world to understand.
Well, the Socratic method, also called 𝗪𝗟𝗟𝗡, means the technique of the midwife, centers around asking questions whether our preconceptions of knowledge are valid. Do we know the truth? Do we have a concrete idea of truth? And if not, are we being manipulated by the art of persuasion, which has been around since years? So the Socratic method, which is also used today in therapeutic sessions, for instance, actually might give you a certain awareness that you are being manipulated, because the perpetuator asking whether something is truth, or whether something is a source, can actually sensitize you and make you more critical. But it is not always applicable to every day. We are bombarded with information, and we just cannot apply the Socratic method on each and every bit of information, because It's just not possible. Yeah. So in general, we cannot protect ourselves from being manipulated any more than we can protect ourselves from getting wet when it rains. Yeah? We just can take an umbrella. So everything which is possible within this realm is to protect ourselves and just be aware that we are being manipulated constantly. And there are indicators. So as we delve deeper into the art of persuasion, we do gain an understanding of what are typical triggers or techniques of emotionalization. And when they are applied, we are most likely to be manipulated to build our opinions. So there are three components of manipulation. 𝗪𝗛𝗡 talked about them. This is emotionalization, which has been around since Aristotle's time, when he said pathos is essential for every successful manipulator. And there's also the triggering of impulses. This is done by certain keywords, certain indicators, or by a framing. You frame a certain person, politician, a celebrity, or by attributing a framework which is in favor or not, and therefore your impulses are triggered before your individual reasoning sets in. That's also an indication. And framing is something which is today very common, and our technology of mass communication actually allows every manipulative person in power to use the framework as the means of triggering your impulses far more effective than any ancient philosopher could have ever done. So mass communication as technology and as artificial intelligence, as you have just mentioned, comes handy in order to manipulate you in the sense of triggering your impulses and framing a certain person or a certain event. Yeah. So you need to keep in mind emotionalization is a powerful tool of manipulation, the triggering of impulses, and as a third technique, the creation of habits. Look at our habits. Our habits today are vastly different from those of the generations of our fathers and forefathers. We cannot even compare. And by creating new habits, we do feel included to a certain judgment as well.
Wow. What do you attribute to the use of intuition as trying to garner truth? Because that's something that we still don't entirely understand, I know, as a society. I mean, we continue to study it and truly get a grasp of what and where intuition comes from. And with your background in mysticism, you know, there are claims and calls for it to come from the other world, from God, from spirits, from wherever the outside case could be. So what sort of role do you place on intuition in trying to have a razor that will cut to truth?
Well, mysticism is not all about intuition. That is the wrong preconception. Because mysticism actually is a kind of early psychology. It deals with reason. It even deals with logic. Because if it wouldn't contain logical, reasonable elements, you would never be able to speak about a mystical experience. It would only be your individual experience, and you couldn't transfer any of it to another person. So it would be unspeakable. There is a logical and a reasonable foundation for mysticism, and therefore even intercultural studies on mysticism are possible. There's Jewish mysticism, Muslim mysticism like Sufism, there's a Brahmanic mysticism, Christian mysticism, and so on. And only because there is a reason, foundation, we are able to write and to communicate mysticism. So the preconception that mysticism is all about intuition, it's about vision, and it's not wrong entirely, but it's also completely accurate. So if you try to allude on the idea that human intuition could be used as a tool to contradistinguish truth from lies or demagoguery, it's possible, but you need to train your intuition. Yeah, because our intuition, of course, is blurred, by our own experiences throughout our lifetime, and of course we do never learn to use it strategically. When will you use it? And when will you learn to use your intuition as a tool? Surely not in our school system. So if you really like to weaponize intuition, it's possible, but it's a long and lonesome journey. Maybe you have a mentor, but of course it is not common knowledge at all. But in general, there is scientific research about intuition as opposed to logic and reason. And part of the scientific results show that what we call intuition actually is an early stage of processing data. So it is still on a subconscious level, but it is not purely fictional, something like that, but it is already a preconscious kind of data processing. So, your gut feeling sometimes is just right. But there's also a philosophical concept behind it. It's a concept also by Aristotle. And this concept shows you that your first idea of something, your first feeling, when it is not yet to be put into words, because it's still on this level of intuitive insight. You're feeling something is wrong, or you're feeling something is right. Something is just right. Turns out to be accurate. Aristotle actually wrote a lot about it, and he called it entelechia. Entelechia means in the beginning of a process, there is already everything contained which might unfold later on.
What is it called again?
Entelechia. Entelechia. For example, if someone is applying for a job and on his way to the job interview, everything goes on. This is an indication, that when he will be working in this job later on, it just will not work out right. Or you meet a person and from the first moment you vibe with this person and everything is just right. And you can see in these situations, which are all too common, we all know such situations, that in the beginning of a process, there is already everything contained which unfolds over time. We just need to train our perception to notice all these indicators, all these signs. And that also is something we do not learn.
We don't learn it at all. First off, that is absolutely fascinating, and I've always been very intrigued by that sort of subject as well. This sort of first impression understanding of your world around you, and how much, and I think maybe even potentially the words you were looking for is before your thought has been formulated into words, you have some sort of emotive feeling, and it's that feeling that we constantly deny, and we've been potentially manipulated to believe that it's useless information, much like dreams or some spiritual experiences for certain cultures. And, you know, it's just a dream, just forget about it. Like, it doesn't mean anything. Just move on, you know, go back to TikTok. And so I see within what you're saying the seeds of things that the world is, you know, can be a mirror, or that everything is contained within one moment, you know, that there is one moment and it's all in the present, and things like that are as within, so without. And I wanted to touch on, because you mentioned it briefly, I'm not sure how much you have delved into Christian mysticism.
Quite deep. It's a topic of
Okay. Okay. Well, I
please ask whatever you would like to ask.
Okay. I only have a brief question, really, that you can probably lay something out for us. But I grew up in a non-strict Catholic household, meaning that religion was not forced on me or anything like this. However, I did go to Catholic schools, not because that was the choice that we needed to put him in this religion, but that the schooling system was better. It was better than the public system. And so I grew up with an understanding of the traditional, basic Christian story and knowledge. Christian mysticism, as it is, as I have grown to see and understand certain things about certain Gnostic groups of people, or the Essenes, and everything I learned outside of school. There wasn't even an ounce, not one paragraph, paper, sentence within the standard teachings of Christian mysticism. And I think it goes lost for a whole lot of people. America itself calls itself, you know, in the undertones, a Christian nation, or can be kind of seen to have and hold Christian values. But the idea of, say, just, this is just a simple one, but like saying meditation. I know that early Christians potentially had a understanding of meditation and was part of the practice of the religion. It's completely devoid. No one says or talks about that. And so it seems like, for me, Christian mysticism was almost like this occult, hidden, weird sect that was just like, don't look at that and just focus on what we told you is this, and we'll be the intermediary between. But it seems to me that Christian mystics may have found a way towards trying to communicate with God or whatever they were trying. So could you touch on what Christian mysticism is, and kind of what the role it's played, and why we don't have so much of it now?
Oh, Christian mysticism is the mysticism of Christian religion. Yeah? 𝗪𝗟𝗋𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 said, there is not mysticism as such. There is mysticism of a religion. There is Jewish mysticism. There is Islamic mysticism, as you have already said, Sufism. There is Brahmanic, Hinduistic mysticism, and there is Christian mysticism. And what does that mean? Well, it does mean that your experience counts more than what called intermediaries teach you. And therefore, mysticism as experience-based way to divinity, so to speak, way to knowledge, has always been a political issue, because it frees people and it empowers people. And therefore, you might imagine mysticism in all cultures, because this is really an intercultural issue, has been even persecuted, especially in politically unstable times. Because the last thing rulers in politically unstable times during upheaval wish for is empowered populations. They can't deal with that. And therefore, mysticism, seen politically, is a strong source of empowerment, because your own experience counts. And you perfect your experience. There are certain techniques, and there have been techniques such as meditation, such as ways to achieve the so-called 𝗦𝘂𝗧𝗧𝗧, unification of the individual human soul and its divine source. And this has been similar, not identical, in the Eastern and Western systems of mysticism, but as we can always see a philosophical phenomenon from two angles, aesthetics and politics. And the aesthetics of mysticism, everybody knows them. This is this beautiful set of meditation, and everything is very harmonious, and you are in tune with yourself and so on. And this is just one angle. The other angle is the political angle, and it means there is a person who trusts himself or herself. The perception, the individual perception, becomes more and more powerful, and the individual himself or herself is dependent. So, mysticism as a source of empowerment has been dangerous and is still dangerous to those who establish and maintain power structures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have seen that, and we had a couple interesting guests who wrote a book called The Dictator's Handbook, and the thesis entirely was that people in power will do whatever they need to do to maintain power, and that they base their political decisions based on the people who are then keeping them in power. And mysticism, as you've described it, yes, would align with their thesis, because it doesn't really do anything for them maintaining their power. It absolutely devalues their role as the one leader of this random group of people with these lines we've drawn on Earth. And I'm curious then, do you see a better world? Is there a solution? I'm asking. It's a tough question since this has been going on, but like, what's the solution then for us politically speaking, if these power structures exist, but the world can be also seen as a mess in certain ways? What do we do?
Mm-hmm. Well, we've been manipulated since at least 2,400 years, if not very much longer. And to wake up and recognize this fact is the first step. The second step is to understand the techniques of manipulation. So we will more acutely tune into situations, moments when we're just being manipulated, and we understand these strategies used upon us, and we can call out those who try to pull wool over our eyes, as you say idiomatically. But as the person with a certain historical knowledge, which you should have and which you should accumulate during a lifetime, because historical knowledge is extremely valuable. It gives you potential for criticizing. Yeah? If you just know the current situation, you cannot criticize anything. And that's why those in power oftentimes try to abolish history altogether, because it is such a powerful resource for developing your criticism. Well, and as a person with a certain amount of historical knowledge, you should also know that there is not one ideology which has ever worked out in human history. It is not one system which is devoid of being erroneous and even damaging people. What we need is an open structure, an open culture of communication and educated. There are three investments you do always need throughout your life. The investment in your health, well, that's obvious. The investment in your knowledge, in your education, and the investment in your relationships. If you do invest into these three areas of your life, you automatically become an empowered person who is not that easy to manipulate. That is already something. And then, of course, community building. You find your tribe, so to speak, and you find other people who are also critical and well educated. So this is how it works. There is not one super meta system of politics policies which could be seen as the second redemption. Everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it does seem to be the case that both balance and an open-minded approach towards just problem solving in general is generally the best way. I mean, there is that saying, obviously, if you're a hammer, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail, right? I think.
You own a hammer.
Yeah, if you own a hammer.
Yeah.
If you own a hammer, or if you are a hammer, maybe. I don't know how. But yeah, exactly. That doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And so there are calls for the use of certain things. I do see, I 100% agree with you. An excellent understanding of history has done wonders for me. The books that I've read and trying to understand past societies, improving my pattern recognition of where and what we are and how things possibly have done, even though they may not repeat exactly, you find that you have a better grasp of your current world and you can kind of pull similarities where they're necessary, and it helps you navigate the space much better, I would say, than being uneducated about it at all and just thinking everything is random, because while there may be some things we don't know, there's definitely some patterns there. Before I get into a question on books, you mentioned the importance of health, knowledge, and relationships to feel empowered. What else would you give to someone who is trying to build personal power, or just power in general, not necessarily over someone in the sense of propaganda, but in order to feel empowerment? Is there something? Because I remember having a discussion, and for men, she was a dating coach, of course, but her idea was skill stacking, essentially stacking your skills. The more you gain skills, the more powerful you felt. As a man, your competence grew, your confidence grew. It was just something that she noticed, right? And so, where would you place that within your thing? I mean, maybe it's under knowledge, but what else would you see?
Well, I agree with you on that. The artist Picasso actually said, "What is seduction?" We all have the wrong idea about seduction. It has nothing to do with monks and roses and satin sheets. So seduction, according to Picasso, actually is the work you have invested into yourself and the work you have invested into your competence. Mastery in one word. Every person, male or female, needs to attain mastery in a certain field. It might be sports, it might be economics, it might be arts, science, whatever, or even something as random as philosophy. And you need to attain mastery. And if you attain mastery, it is an iterative process. Actually, you become more of an artist in what you do. It's like learning piano. You need to learn for a long time in order to improvise. But at a certain moment in time, you become a master, you become an artist. And this is not the last stage of evolution. If you become more than an artist in what you master, then you become a kind of magician. Master actually is powerful, seductive source of dealing with relationships, professional and privately. Mastery also gives you confidence to overcome struggles in your life, crisis, and to be kind of immune against what society tries to manipulate you to. So you define your own group and your own role by becoming a master in your domain of competence. Because what societies of all times have done was giving the populations a blueprint of roles. Actually, this does not work out except for very few people. Yeah, you do not just choose one and be happy ever after, but you actually have to find your own and role, and that is only possible by means of mastery. If you master your field of competence, you do feel self-assured because you know you can overcome all these wrong attributions from the exterior. That is very, very powerful and makes you, as I've said, kind of immune. Of course, completely immune because we are social creatures. We all are looking for appreciation. It's normal for validation. But being a master of a certain field actually does not only set you apart from other people, but connects you.
That desire and struggle, I feel, it's something I've learned throughout my whole life. I class myself as an introvert, and all of my channels and all of my speaking would say otherwise, but everything I do outside of that is very inner work related. And so hearing that, I can attest to that. Most definitely, you feel you're strongest when you've mastered, when you've leveled up in a new language, when you've learned the new trick at football. There's no one else there, maybe even that you need to impress with that, and no one may even know that. But there is some sort of strange feeling, electrical energy that you gain, and then you carry that throughout the rest of your life. Like you say, it transfers itself into your discussions with other people, or your relationships and stuff like that. And so it's fascinating. I want to get into some of the books potentially that have had a big role on you. And I know you've probably read a bajillion books in your life, but based around some of the themes that we've already talked about today, are there a few books, regardless of how hard they would be, that you say, listen, if I had 5, 6 books to understand the world, to gain personal power, to truly help me navigate the world and understand persuasion, even on a defensive way or offensive way, what would they be?
Well, in general, there are early studies about mass psychology, the psychology of the masses as such, because mass psychology is very different from individual psychology. Masses are in their entirety not more than the sum of their components, but in a certain way less, because they are more accessible to manipulation. And that's something early researchers already found out. There are 3 of them. Sigmund Freud, who was actually the latest, and before Freud, Gustav Le Bon and Georges Sorel. These 3 psychologists, sociologists, already wrote about mass communication and mass propaganda as a strategic tool. And then, of course, Edward Lee, 1928, that means between 2 world wars, about propaganda. It's the same name as the title of the book, Propaganda. And he equates propaganda in politics with advertisements in the commercial realm. So it's always the same strategy of emotionalization, triggering of your impulses, and creating habits, whether you are a clever businessman advertising your products and your services, or whether you are a politician selling, so to speak, a new technology. So these books really very valuable and give you a great insight into the structures on which we still operate today. If you would like to delve a little deeper, linguistically, rhetorically, it's Aristotle, rhetorics, because he describes the technique of how to build up your speech with logic, reason, with emotions, and with fake true values. And so this is also very interesting to read, because you might ask, what has changed since more than 2000 years? It's still valid. And for those who are more interested in the psychological aspect, there is one book by Freud's student 𝗪𝗚𝗡𝗏, who was one of the biggest geniuses in 20th century science. Well, who have been the geniuses? It was Nikola Tesla and it was Wilhelm Reich, to name only two. Wilhelm Reich did excel in his research on the organ, on the life force. Organ is exactly what all mystical schools of the world describe in different words. It's prana in India, it's ki from China right now, and it's lux in some schools of mysticism. And for Wilhelm Reich, it was organ. It was the first one to actually give it a natural scientific foundation. So this was genius. But prior to that, his research on mass psychology actually predicted precisely the development of the Third Reich. His book, The Mass Psychology of Fascism, it has been released in 1933, prophesied how fascism in Germany, but also in Europe overall, Mussolini in Italy, Franco in Spain, would develop, because according to Reich, who did humanistically oriented research, fascism or any totalitarian regime can only fall into place if there is already a neurotic structure in the population. And that's not said to blame the common citizen for being accessible to certain manipulative strategies, but it shows how big a role mental health actually plays in text. Because we today are seduced to think, oh, mental health is just something individual. No? There is my auntie having some problems with depression, or there is my cousin struggling with an addiction. But it is not only an individual problem. It is a problem of the common population. It does have economical consequences, large economical consequences, if you think about it. And it has political consequences, because society with an increasing number of people mentally unstable or damaged in a way, or showing dependency issues, is a society which is easily manipulated. So investing into mental health, even in this regard and on this scale, is also means to prevent the rise of totalitarian regimes.
Stacking skills is one of the greatest things you can do in order to bring value to yourself and the people around you, especially one like learning a new language. I bet most of you guys had no idea that I could speak 9 languages, and that we have a YouTube channel with almost 100,000 subscribers where I do exclusively just that. And we break down the method for exactly what an idiot guy like me has done in order to do this. It's not complex, it's not complicated, and most of you guys have probably used the traditional method, and the traditional method sucks. That's why you can't speak any Spanish after 4 years of going to high school and taking Spanish week in, week out. If you want to learn to speak a language the fastest, easiest, and most natural way, click the link right down below, 𝗪𝗟𝗡𝗏 Languages. We've got the method for you. Check it out.
And that's it's very pertinent right now to the times that we live in, because I don't know the stats per se, but I know it came up in another podcast. The rate at which mental health is deteriorating is something that has been unseen in the last 100 years. And the debate then became on what's the cause, of course, of this, to which, I'm not sure myself. I mean, you can put your fingers on a few things, but I'm not sure if you're poking at the source or just some more symptoms of a fractured society, which it appears we have some issues. Because propaganda, I would say there is some awareness, and as you said, that's a first step in trying to make sure that you aren't duped. The UFO subject has now become mainstream in the US. I'm not sure how much you're aware of the new world we live in where they can talk about this up front. The governments are putting this, we're having hearings on it and stuff like this. Are you at all familiar with the situation? First off, what do you see? Because, I've had on people who have been convinced, I've had on Dr. Stephen Greer, who's convinced that this is leading towards something. It's very confusing for the common man who's outside of it. And I know, regardless of whether or not there is or isn't, there's still tools for propaganda and manipulation, whether or not this is a real story, a fake story, something, there's a reason behind it. Do you see any reasons behind it? Do you understand? What do you see when you see this massive shift and change in the way we deal with that subject?
It is multifaceted. There is more to it than meets the eye. But of course, such strategic media campaigns are oftentimes a distraction. I do not deal with this phenomenon ontologically. We are not talking about what is or what is not. Just let us see it strategically. What is the effect? What is the outcome? Because all kinds of propaganda, as a concept, do follow a strict rule. Propaganda, the term actually has been invented in the Vatican. It was in 1622 when Pope Gregory XV invented the term propaganda, and it was meant as a strategic form of communication between the missionaries and the population. So propaganda, propagare in Latin, means to spread the message. Propaganda has since been defined as the homogenization of content, of method, and of outcome, means opinion. So if we are dealing with mass media campaign of whatever content, we are dealing with propaganda, and it means there is an homogenization of content. You see it everywhere. You hear it everywhere. It's an homogenization of methods. There are certain strategic methods of communication which are used again and again. And there is an homogenization of the result of your opinion. It's a manufacturing of an opinion. And in general, part beyond this topic, the homogenization of opinion oftentimes should lead psychologically to the common population feeling less power. It might happen, as we have touched upon before, by dissociating citizens from their own perception. We had it dealing with mysticism again. You do not rely on your own experience. You are in dire need of an intermediate, of a guru, of a church leader, of him to interpret, and you need to quote him at all. This is also the typical power dependency structure. You are not yourself, but you are always dependent on someone. And back to the topic of propaganda, there is the hidden or not so hidden aim of dissociating with your own perception. And there's also the aim of destructing you, because what we've said before, investing in your health, in your knowledge, and in your relationships is the best investment you can ever make in your whole. Doesn't matter whether you're a billionaire or whether you're a pauper. Yeah, you always need to invest in these three realms. And you do so, you are a threat in a certain way to structures and power, because what power propaganda does is offering you fake health, fake knowledge, and fake relationships. And if you are able to provide this, you're not susceptible anymore. Yeah? So you don't fall for this shit. So,
right. It's very, but the thing that I think is really interesting about it is that there's a comfort, I feel, in taking their route. We'll take care of you. The government's we've got your back. We'll when you retire, we'll take care of you, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of these things don't pan out to be true, but the comfort, I feel we have a society, and I'm speaking mainly for the West, and US more, in which comfort is almost the goal of, and it's just to get a comfortable job that has a comfortable pay, that you don't have to think. And thinking as a tool for living, I have found, is probably the greatest tool I've had as I delve out away from my home, and I've lived outside of the country for a very long time, and my ability to adapt and think and rationalize and learn to read people and learn to read things, and all of those experiences are it's uncomfortable when you show up in the country and you don't speak the language, you don't know anyone. It's very uncomfortable. You have to constantly, and I watched myself get very good at doing that, to which I'm at the point where the world seems small. To travel someplace now seems small. I've built up networks, I've built up skills and experiences, and I so want everyone to have that same ability, and to not feel that, because I think it allows for communication, like you said, which is having an open communication. I don't read through the ideas of what it's like to be in Croatia through the news. I'm not force fed to me. I go there, I get it, I speak the language, I can read, I can watch TV, I can read books, and so I find that, fascinating in and of itself. But to go back to one other thing you said, which you touched on, Christian mysticism and just mysticism in general.
Yeah, just have one remark. The way of comfort is directly opposed to the way of mastery. Then you have it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's no. That's actually, I mean, I'll touch on that there, because we teach a lot of football skills and on our other channel, and it's very strange to me now, because as of 15, 20 years ago, players just wanted to be very, very, very good at the sport. They wanted to become masters of the sport. And one thing I've discussed, and other people have discussed that are 10 to 15 years older than me, is that players, young players in the game now, don't want to be masters of the game. They just want to be seen on TikTok or seen on social media as having the skills. And what has happened is that a whole bunch of teachers have popped up that don't have mastery of the sport or the skill. They have an ability to convey maybe the basics, but then they teach. And then so it made me think of something that had happened in the 70s and 80s in the US, which was players from England who weren't good enough to play in England, which was the top of the top. They moved to the US, and they started coaching. And they would tell people that they were excellent players over there. And what happened is that they made these big, giant facilities. They taught thousands and thousands of kids how to play the game, obviously at a subpar level, because they had no mastery themselves. But because it was a new thing for the Americans, and they were seduced by the English accent, to some degrees, it wasn't just England, but many, many places did this, because it brought up a level of, it stagnated the society. It stagnated the game. And I wonder if that can happen now, especially with these mass tools. If you go and you learn from someone who isn't like yourself, has spent decades understanding this topic in order to try and, I can ask you questions and you come back with knowledge points, and I'm sure you're even dumbing it down so I can understand even more clear. And so, yeah, I totally get where that point. It's completely against mastery and just having the easy route, let's say. But my question, did you want to comment on that? Go ahead.
All appearances do count more than substance in our today, day and age. And the media culture, mass media, social media, do play a crucial in this. Yeah, because you cannot distinguish at first glance whether an influencer, for example, actually does have a high level of competence. Usually they are farther away from competence than the Earth is the sun. But you just don't discover it at first glance. And especially when you're very young, if you don't lack any experience to compare most minds to those superficial phrases, how could you? And this is also a competence, a social skill never learned in school. Our school systems are very inadequate in this regard. So it reminds me of a situation, again, in antiquity and ancient Greece. There have been philosophers and the so-called sophists. Sophists have been teachers who have sometimes had a certain amount of qualification, but sometimes not. They have been like coaches, rhetorical coaches, and their claim was to make everybody competent to speak in, for example, in the realm of politics, which was held in very high regard, because such a young democracy as the Athenian actually praised their politicians and the rhetoric geniuses or whomever they thought would be capable of performing such tasks. And therefore, learning rhetorics, even in this very superficial understanding of just persuading the masses by artifices, by some rhetorical tricks, has been seen as an art and science in itself. And there was always this conflict between philosophers, such as Socrates and Plato, Aristotle, and the sophists, who were just well-paid coaches and actually gained a fortune by making false promises, just as it is today. So what has changed? Nothing has changed, but the difference actually is more than 2,000 years ago, there was actually a public discussion. Who is better? The philosophers seeking truth or the sophists just being after some profits? And today, this difference is not even noticed by the common population. There's no discussion. So it's problematic, especially for young people growing up in our culture, to even understand that there is a problem.
Yeah. The discussion factor, would you say that we're not just having the discussion in a very poor way in our comment sections in social media? Is that the discussion? Is that the public, the public discourse now? We struggle to communicate. That seems to be a thing, at least in a way that would bring results or some form of conclusion, like you said, on is this better or is this not better? Who can present that argument and why, and help us to understand that. There's an interesting discussion going on with genders in the world right now, and I just have a question, once again, not on the actual subject at hand, but in what is the supposed propaganda surrounding it. We had a former guest, his name's Patrick Bet David, on the podcast, and he on his own podcast was trying to correlate the fact that now, I'm not sure what the percentage was, let's say it was roughly 15, 20%, something like this, of young people identified as transgender. It's somewhere under there, maybe under 20%. Whereas in the generation beforehand, and obviously previously, the number was almost non-existent. And he attributed that to the influence that the media has in order to change minds, or to let people, like, to actually change their mind as to who and what they are, their identity, you know? And so I'm curious, one, if you find any truth or any seed of truth within that being capable, or if that's even possible, or what you think about that.
There is something very sinister as a background, and it has to do with the industry. The number of so-called gender assignment clinics has skyrocketed since 10, 15 years. And of course, there are doctors, there are treatments, and what do they know? And what do they need? They do need demand for this. There is actually, as far as I know, because I'm not a doctor myself and a philosopher, I do see these problems and changes from a different angle. But as far as I know, there is actually a medical condition called gender dysphoria. So it happens. Some people are of the conviction they are born in the wrong body, but the actual percentage in the common population is very, very small. It's less than 1 in 10,000 people, as far as I know. So, and most of these people with the medical condition of gender dysphoria are male. Today, the situation is different. The majority of those young people who claim to be born in the wrong body, so to speak, are young teenage girls. And what are they saying actually? They say, we do not feel comfortable with the social roles imposed upon us as young women, young girls in society. We do not want to conform. And there's a reason for it. There's a set of reasons for that. But their idea of solving this problem is to change physical and not to find out, well, I'm a girl, what kind of a man? Because there's so many facets of womanhood. And the individual differences between the individuals of the same gender might be far more crucial than the differences of the two sexes. So where is this natural process that happened during puberty of just finding out what is my identity? Who am I? And what am I as a human person? Surely much more than my body. And even if I would identify primarily as my body, which is, by the way, very unphilosophical to do, but even if and very unspiritual to do. Because we've talked about spirituality and mysticism. That no mystic of no culture whatsoever would ever define himself, herself, just as body or physical vessel. It's honored. But even if you would, persuaded by our materialistic culture, describe and define yourself just as a physical being, aren't you much more than your genitalia, so to speak? And this is even in this materialistic mindset so reduced, so ridiculous. So, well, we need to rethink the whole process of finding one's identity. Our identity is not gender identity, primarily physical identity. It's the identity, It's the identity of being, a being of reason, and a being of values, and a being of spiritual and mental power, because that is essentially what we are, and does not need to seem esoteric to you if I speak in this way, because actually the definition of human being as a person, as being reasonable and containing understanding of values, is the legal definition. What is a person in the legal meaning of the terminology? Not your body, and it's not your sexual orientation. Yeah, and the law deals with you as a person of reason. And that is essentially what we are, and we need to come back to this idea of us as living, learning organisms, directed by our reason and by our spirituality.
And I wonder how much of the attempt to get people to identify with their bodies has to do with the empowerment that we discussed, by the masses, or by the elite, I guess you could say, or the controlled, those, because I can attest from at least myself, the spiritual factor, as I mentioned in Catholic school, was not touched on. It was, your identity was given through, we tell you what these stories mean, you believe them, and that's it. What I thought about them, how I, reacted to them was not important. And so the spiritual aspects, even while going to a quote unquote religious, should be spiritual school, was not touched on. And the issue that I'm seeing is also, it's related to what you spoke about, communication, because the discussion around this has also been weaponized. You can hardly say much about it before someone will be screaming at you, telling you that this is wrong, or you're denying my rights, or you're whatever it is. And so that's another huge problem. And woke culture in and of itself has created some sort of the cancel culture, and the whole thing is just completely useless, because the second someone even says it, before you've understood truly what they mean, if they misspoke, if they just didn't quite understand the other person, you're canceled. You're out. And so it just seems, it's hard for me to understand what the use is of I know we want to root out individuals, as we all do in either an organization or society, that are bad, dangerous, or going to hurt everyone. That makes sense. It does. But in a discussion factor, it seems very strange. I'm not sure what you think of woke culture and cancel culture as it's developed.
Well, it's in the tradition of propaganda, as you said, it's the homogenization of content, method, and outcome, creating of a certain opinion. And what is this all about? Woke culture is very popular, and especially very popular in science today, not only in the media, also in the science, on the scientific field. And I've always wondered, why is that so popular? Because it directly contradicts what science is all about. Logic, reason, empirical proof. Feelings are not empirical proof. And some idea of being discriminated when one is not. Please don't get me wrong. I'm an advocate of every person who's actually discriminated to speak up for herself or himself. Of course, this is a given. But alleged feelings of being treated in a certain way, which is not aligned with their momentary idea of self. This has nothing to do with science as it is, because science is, the foundation of knowledge today. And science conducted in an accurate way does actually give you an immunity against roguish claims. But while I was still wondering, why is that so popular, and how did it happen so fast within just a few years? Imagine, all these discussions had been impossible 10 years prior, or even 5 years prior. So how could it have happened that so much changed within just a few years. My conclusion is it's very popular with those who don't have an accurate knowledge of history and who don't feel the need of being holier than thou. Because usually, especially in science, you need to be a master of your field in order to discuss it properly and to persuade, because the Aristotelian propagandistic means of pathos does not serve you at all. You would be bored at, or you have been bored at, if you use and overuse emotionalization and triggering of impulses within science. This had been unheard of. Nowadays, it's oftentimes the case with people who are relatively new in academia. They don't know the history and they don't learn it, but this bookish ideology is a made concept. They can cling to this concept and in an instant feel smart, well educated, and in a way, because it always has something to do with shaming or guilt tripping, they feel endowed.
Yeah. And that is something that I've noticed. It goes back to what I was discussing on comfort. Simply that, it's easier. And if we can prepackage your job, your life, what you're supposed to do on your vacation, what you're supposed to have, what you're supposed to think, then you don't have to worry about anything. And so in any case, Claudia, this has been a tremendous discussion. It's one that I'm going to have to go back and learn a whole lot. For everybody who's listening that wants to dig into more, where should we send them? Where can they find out more?
Do you mean institution-wise, book-wise?
Well, we're going to link to all of your stuff, but some of the people here might not speak German. I don't know how much you have out there in the world, but for our English-speaking crowd, is there anything that you're up to or that you might want to throw them towards besides your books as well?
Most of my research is accessible online on ResearchGate and Academia Edu, so you can easily look it up. There is also research on the tools of persuasion and propaganda and all these techniques dating back from antiquity, sophistry as a propagandistic tool from Plato's time until Noam Chomsky. So you will find plenty of ideas.
Okay, perfect. Listen, guys, we will link to obviously all the books and that we discussed here, as well as all of Claudia's work. I really appreciate it. We're definitely going to have to do this again. There's a whole lot of other topics in your research that fascinate me, and I'm sure the rest of the people are going to want to hear more from you. So thanks once again.
The pleasure is mine.